Okay. It's Monday. I'm going to be honest. I just shifted gears. Usually, every morning, I start out my day by working on what's done. By working on a project. I'm building a little wiki. So working on a wiki project, entering data. I usually do it for about an hour is what it takes. But really my goal is to do 30 entries. And it usually takes about an hour. And today it went very badly. Well, not badly, just it was there was a lot more to it than I thought. Just trying to make sure all of my settings are good here. I know that, so the last time I did this, which again, now it's been a while, I think I indicated that I was going to get the rest of Chapter 9 done, that day, which was a good goal, but not one that I met. Ended up getting busy and distracted with other things, and I never finished. So, still on Chapter 9. In fact, I'm exactly where I left off last time. Anyway, so this morning, instead of it taking an hour, I'm not even halfway done yet. It's an ongoing project, but I wanted to get into this. So let's go. Let's do this. Okay, that's fine. So, just like last time, the idea is I'm going to normalize these tracks up to the volume that I need, and then I'm going to take out any silences. Well, I'm not going to take them out, but I'm going to reduce them.
Yes, but that's not true.
To actual silence.
True.
Because like right there, you can hear I took a breath. And so, right or wrong, I still think people don't like that. People do not like hearing me breathe while they're listening to the story. I think I went back and listened to my prior streams.
This.
There's another breath there. I went back and listened to my prior streams, and even the fact that you can hear me breathing on stream, I thought was a little obnoxious. Maybe that's just a me thing. Like maybe it's not as important to other people as it is to me. But I'm just gonna roll with it. That's what I'm gonna do. Okay. Scheduling things for the rest of my day. I went and bought groceries yesterday, and I did a really bad job.
He wants to.
Ooh.
And he wants to.
Okay, that's fine.
Nobody else will.
Okay. I ended up getting a bunch of snacks, but not any actual food. And I used up quite a bit of money doing it. So, one of the things I got to do here with the rest of my day is I got to figure out what we're going to be eating now that I've spent too much money on snacks. I got to figure out meals for cheaper.
Because of...
Okay, a little bit of a breath there. But anyway, what did I write in the description? Let me think for a second. What did I want to talk about? Oh, having difficult conversations with people. Yeah. So this is one that I think I've spent a lot of time talking about with my kids, but I think there's a lot more. There's always more to talk about. And what I mean by difficult conversations is really any conversation that you're going to have with somebody where you know you disagree with them. Like there is a difference in viewpoint, I guess. Now, there's a few ways to handle it. I think culturally we've, maybe this will resonate with people, maybe not.
Teach now.
But I think culturally we've kind of settled into feeling like, hey, if I disagree with somebody, it's better for me to just cut them out of my life. And there's like a very bad version of that, but I think that there is actually an honestly good intent behind it.
Book.
And I think that the good intent is this. There's a presumption. So I guess I got to backtrack just a little bit to say, for a long, long time, the doctrine that's been sort of is like very aggressive words, I understand, but I think fair words. The doctrine that has been taught
Is a protector.
in sort of popular ideology is that people don't change. That's the doctrine that you heard a lot for a long time. People don't change, so you either have to accept them how they are or just learn to deal with it, or I guess obviously cut them out of your life.
Gods are subject to her, as are we.
Okay. I kind of understand the general ideology. I just think it had been taken too far. I don't think that you can say that people don't change. I think people change all the time. I think people change in good ways and in bad ways. I think people change in small ways and in very big ways constantly. It is somewhat unpredictable how people are going to change. But they do. They change. And wielding influence in conversation, in logic, like these are, in my opinion, these are good things. I guess the way I would put it is I think it is a good thing to have a conversation with somebody and try to, come to, I think I did, okay. I think I did a fade in on that. Maybe not. Try to come to some kind of mutual agreement, I think is a good thing. And I think that it is reasonable to expect that
ultimate power over
if you provide somebody with information perhaps that they haven't considered, I think it's reasonable to expect that they might change their mind, that they might come over to your side, as it were. And one of the things that I think is incredibly unhealthy that came out of the ideology of people don't change is this result that we've kind of seen in our society, which, in my opinion, really amplified to an extremely unhealthy extent during COVID. I think the pandemic and people's differing opinions about vaccination and the mask issue, wherever you land on that, I guess, right now, I don't really want to talk about that specifically other than to bring it up and say, it was an issue that people had different opinions about. And so with this underlying ideology of like people don't change, the sort of good version of dealing with that was just like, well, okay, so I'm just going to take these people out of my life, right? So they're not going to change. And so why have this conflict with them? There's no point to it. It makes both of our lives worse, right?
To protect it from chaos.
And I guess I would say that that's not a bad thought. Like, I don't think that that's an inherently harmful thought to say that I don't believe you and I are ever going to agree about this issue. And so instead of just arguing with each other all the time about it, let's just separate. We'll go our separate ways. You can believe what you believe. I will believe what I believe. It's fine. I'm going to cut you out of my life, as it were. And then that, I think, in my opinion, that kind of got weaponized from there into, you better not talk about something that I don't like, because if you do, I might never talk to you again. And I think it became like an extremely unhealthy thing in our culture. And so that has led to now where I feel like I need to talk to my kids about, what does it look like to actually have a difficult conversation?
If the manuscripts are true, and
with somebody, like, how do you do that? What can you expect to come from that? That kind of thing. And I'm doing this in sort of like the absence of any kind of real expertise. Like, I'm bad at it.
With power.
Like, here's what happens to me, because I'm really unpracticed, right? The thing that happens to me when I dive in, and I'm a very non-confrontational person by nature. So when I dive into a disagreement with somebody, like, already, before they even know what's going on, I'm already on edge, because I already know it's going to be a disagreement, and I already know the potential for it going badly for me.
Power. Then.
So, like, one of the things is the way that I live my life, I'm not necessarily well versed in a wide range of topics. I have what I would call general beliefs. Let's take a specific thing. For example, I generally believe that capitalism is good. It's a good economic system. Now, I recognize,
allow yourself to be maligned. So,
I recognize right off the bat that that's going to rub a lot of people the wrong way, potentially, and it even rubs people the wrong way within my own family. So the only reason I'm bringing a specific up is that it's just easier for me to talk about a specific, which is like, that's my general belief, and it's generally based on what I understand of different economic systems from how they were taught to me in my, like, primary school years.
Then where is she?
And I definitely grew up in a period where, generally speaking, in all of the school systems, this was taught. Like, capitalism is fundamentally better than the alternatives. So, capitalism was taught in a positive light, and the other systems were taught in a negative light, right? So, there's like a underlying preference there that I already have.
Can come to.
So all of that is true. So if I'm sitting down and having a conversation with somebody about this subject matter, like, I'm self-aware enough to know that I have this viewpoint, but I don't, like I haven't really given it a bunch of thought in a while. So I don't know that I have like a bunch of strong opinions about the specifics. And generally, if I'm bringing it up, I'm going to be probably a little nervous.
Either she is not real, or
I'm going to be a little nervous about looking stupid, right? Because that's the thing I think anybody can recognize. If you're going to engage in a conversation about something that you have like a cursory knowledge of, but not a ton of specific knowledge, you haven't spent a lot of time lately thinking about it and thinking about all the different nuances of it as a subject, there's a big chance you're going to talk to somebody who has spent a lot of time really closely examining it. And that can be dangerous, particularly if they hold a different viewpoint than you. There's a good chance they're going to bring something up you maybe weren't even aware of, or you've forgotten what you thought about that specifically. And when they bring it up, ultimately you're not going to have an answer to it, right?
From us. But
so here's the problem with deciding just not to have the conversation because there's potential for you to look silly. The problem with that is that's like a really arrogant stance to have. The presumption in that is that you don't have anything to learn, right? Like this stance that I hold, I have no interest in learning anything new about it. The way that I feel about it is the way that I want to always feel about it, and I don't want to make any change, so therefore I'm not interested in hearing any new ideas that might force me to reconsider my viewpoint. That is a very arrogant stance. That the presumption behind that is I'm right and everybody else is wrong. So if somebody disagrees with me, yeah, they might be able to make me look stupid, but that's just going to be frustrating because I already know that I'm right and they're wrong. And I don't think that that's a super healthy way to engage with people around you. I think it is healthier to have a measure of, I don't know if doubt is the right word, but some measure of humility about the things that you know.
But hiding is not.
And I think that the way that you demonstrate that is by being willing to engage in conversations where, yeah, you're going to look stupid. And in fact, that happened to me. I have a family member who doesn't necessarily agree with that. He doesn't necessarily disagree with it either, to be fair. But he has most assuredly spent more time thinking about it than I have in recent memory.
Our enemy. Do you?
And so there was an opportunity between us to have a discussion, and I'm the one who brought it up. And there was an opportunity between us to have a discussion about it where he could share some of the things that he's learned and some of the thoughts that he has and some of the reasons why he has some doubt about what actually in practice works and what in practice doesn't work.
No, why? The Eccles.
Now, a lot of my disagreements with him specifically come from a place of extreme presumption. Like some of the things that he would say, I presume he feels that way because of some kind of sense of entitlement or something like that, which isn't fair. That's just how I'm choosing to look at him. And then to not give him a chance to address that is kind of gross, right? Like that's mean and it's arrogant and it's not the right thing to do.
The Ecclesiastic.
And I think, the reason to bring it up is because I think a lot of people fall into this trap a lot where, You don't want to consider the opposing view. You don't want to take the time to think about it. Maybe it's an inconvenient time for it to even have been brought up. Like maybe you didn't intend to seriously consider any of your ideology today. So bringing it up is more or less just inconvenient for you. You're not ready for you're unprepared to even consider the possibility. I think that can be okay to an extent, right? And I think most people will.
It is because
I think most people will do you the courtesy of kind of dancing around it. Like they will not bring up the hard conversations. And I think not in a patronizing way either. Like if you're gonna be friends with people, if you're gonna have a positive relationship with them, then the majority of your experience with them should be enjoyable as opposed to confrontational or difficult.
Smilles.
I think it's a mistake to assume that somebody's going to enjoy being around you when the majority of what you do with them is make them feel uncomfortable. But I think, there's a balance to that too. Like there can and maybe even should be some amount of feeling uncomfortable. You shouldn't avoid it entirely, but I think most people will do you the courtesy of like trying to do things together that both of you enjoy and aren't difficult.
In the way.
Now, in this circumstance, which my oldest got to observe, which is part of the reason why I want to keep talking about it, because to be honest, what he observed was me handling it really badly and behaving in an inappropriate way and throwing my brother out of the house. And he was upset by that. He wasn't expecting it, and he was sitting there
Despite them. And
sitting there and observing it, and he didn't want it to happen, and he was trying to encourage me to stop. And I'm guilty of being in the moment and being overwhelmed, and I absolutely should have not reacted the way that I did. Like the way that I reacted was bad. It wasn't the way that I would like to react.
Suffer in the world. But
so to give a little more context, here's what happened. We were just sitting and chatting, and he said something, and I kind of like laughingly agreed with him, and it was some kind of snide comment about capitalism as a system.
Makes sense.
And so I, just sort of, maybe it was more a nervous laugh than anything. I don't know. But after, like sort of laughingly agreeing with him, I thought to myself, I'm being really disingenuous here. Like it's almost like I'm lying to his face, right? Like that's not okay. I should at least do the courtesy of being honest about the fact that I do still think that capitalism, of the options on the table, is probably the best one. It's not without its flaws, but I still think it's a good system.
As the protector. So.
Okay, 2 breaths. So that was my motivation for bringing it up. My motivation for bringing it up was just like, I feel like a liar right now. I feel like I need to, be honest. I need to do the courtesy of being honest about who I am and what I'm thinking, instead of just laughing along and possibly perpetuating a belief that I think something that I don't think. And essentially give him the opportunity to disagree with me directly. Which I think all of that was all a good thought. Like, I think in that I was doing the right thing.
Use it.
But it was just everything that happened afterward, right? So I told him, here's the thing. That was funny, but I still think that capitalism is the best idea. Like, I'm not on board with socialism or whatever it is that you might want to propose as a viable alternative. I don't think ultimately it works out as well as you would like. Oh, hang on a second. I just made a mistake. Okay. And I mean, like, he was fine. To be perfectly honest, he was gracious. And his response to what I said was really like, okay, well, let's talk about it. Which I think is a reasonable response, right? I opened the door. I was the one who said, look, I disagree with you. I just want to be honest with you and tell you I disagree with you. So I opened the door to the discussion. He didn't. He didn't ask for the discussion. He didn't say that we needed to discuss it. He didn't say anything other than his little quip. That was it. And so his reaction to me was, hey, okay, if you're going to bring it up, let's talk about it.
As though it were a bad thing.
So I was immediately, I was like a deer in headlights as soon as that happened. As soon as because I don't know what I was expecting, to be honest. Whatever I was expecting was pretty unreasonable, I think. I was just kind of expecting, like, I would get to say that, just kind of say it, and then just leave it there. And that was going to be fine. And, why would that be fine? In hindsight, it's kind of like, of course he's going to talk about it. And so he started to try to talk about it. And the way he wanted to talk about it was he started to bring up some examples of, like, what he was, as I recall, trying to say was essentially, you don't even believe that capitalism is 100% the best system because you already accept systems within our, economic situation here in the United States that are not capitalistic.
Though
that was where he was coming from, which was, I think, like a perfectly reasonable way to open up the conversation. Whatever point he would ultimately make, which I didn't have the grace or presence of mind to let him make, but whatever point he was going to work toward, he wanted to start from a place of saying, okay, well, think about these things that you already accept.
And had nothing to do.
And I think, that was a smart starting place for him. But I got flustered, right? Like, first of all, I had started a conversation I actually didn't want to start because I actually knew, right? Like, I knew already that he's invested a lot more thought into this than I have. He's been thinking about this pretty hard for a few years, and his ideology has transitioned over the time that he's been thinking about it and reading about it and considering what's going on currently in our culture and what he feels might be some fixes for that.
Book is the
so right off the bat, like, I knew he knew more than me. And I knew he was going to be able to bring up points that were going to make me look silly. Like, instantly, as soon as he started talking, I was like, uh-oh. I did it. I really stepped in it.
His daughter, so.
And I think, the right thing to do in that moment is to, sort of metaphorically take a deep breath and say, all right, here's a person who has thought more deeply about this than I have. And although I, in a general way, disagree with them, I need to exercise a certain level of humility in this moment. And I need to be willing to listen to the point that they're trying to make. That would have been the right thing to do. Not what I did. What I did was I got super defensive. And I told him, okay, great. You got me. Of course, I agree with that point. Good job. I guess you're going to make me look stupid. I don't want to talk about this.
Years ago.
And I think in a perfectly reasonable way, he said, well, don't be so quick to not want to talk about it. I actually have some things I want to say that might be useful to you. That was his comeback. Not in those exact words, but that was, basically what he said. And he was very calm. He didn't I went from, 0 to 10 instantly. He didn't elevate at all.
Even born.
And I was already embarrassed. I was already flustered. Ultimately, look, the point I'm trying to make right now is that I was wrong. Okay? So there's really no defense for the way that I handled it, which was, he said, okay, well, I think we should talk about it. And then I just elevated even further. I yelled at him for trying to continue the conversation. I told him that it was rude of him to say that I was an idiot. He never said that I was an idiot. That came from me, not from him. That was my reaction to what he said. And I told him I thought he should leave. And he said, all right, that sounds right. And he got up and he left. So I was completely wrong in that. And I think, that's a really good example of some of the reason why we want to avoid difficult conversations and confrontation. I mean, that's a big part of the reason why I personally avoid confrontation as much as possible.
I discovered this book. Very.
It's not even so much that I'm going to be proven wrong. I mean, I think, of course, that's a part of it.
This book. Very. This book.
Nobody likes to be made to look stupid. I would almost argue that, I've been made to look stupid so much in my life that I should probably be pretty comfortable with it at this point. So sometimes I am. But particularly in that moment, what I think was the real problem was just an utter lack of humility, right?
It was apparent to him.
I wasn't interested in being wrong. I wasn't interested in being humble at all.
On time. So
my pride was under threat, and I didn't want to deal with that. And so I got big, and I got loud, and I yelled, and I chased him away, and we didn't have the conversation. And I think in a lot of cases that would be that. That's where it would end for two people.
Curious about it.
I worry that there have been times in my life where that's it. That's where I've ended it with somebody else. Is just right there. Just okay, well, we disagree, and I'm just never going to deal with that. So I think firstly is we should value people more. I kind of grew up in a situation not from my own family, but just in the area that we lived in and the people that we lived around. I grew up in a situation where probably the easiest, most defensive way to handle everything about that community was to just aspire to this ideal of like not caring about other people,
which were quite different.
And I think that's a terrible ideal.
Alas. Now,
to I think for me, it started off with this sort of innocent kind of I don't care about what you think about me. Like, I'm not going to let it affect me. Well, that's a lie. Like, I think anybody who feels the need to say that obviously is affected by what other people think about them.
no.
Now, that's just anecdotal. Like, I think for me, I obviously care a lot about what other people think about me. And the fact that the community that we lived in rejected us wholesale, I don't need to be coy about it. They rejected us wholesale because my parents had moved there. So first generation. And that community hated anybody who hadn't been there for many generations. They were very xenophobic, I guess, in a way. That's not exactly it, but
normally, no.
So, they disliked me not because of who I am as a person necessarily, as much as because of what I represented. I represented terrible experiences and the death of some kind of ideal that they had. So they were like bound to, they needed to dislike me.
About this book or what it.
And like, I think in fairness, I can't really fault them for their own trauma or whatever you want to call it.
Holds. Because.
But also, I think it would be a lie to say that it didn't impact me as a person to just be disliked. And there was nothing I could do about it. So I came at that with, like I said, this defensive kind of response of like, okay, well then I don't care what anybody thinks about me.
No way.
That's how I'm going to deal with it. I'm just going to keep telling myself that. Like, I don't have to care what they think about me, and I don't. And it doesn't matter. I don't think that, like, pragmatically there's a way to really make that actually work. At least I didn't know of a way. And so I just kind of developed this chip on my shoulder about how I didn't care about what people thought about me.
About it. But do you...
And I persisted with that for a long time. And so when it came to having disagreements with people, that was kind of just, that was my go-to method of dealing with it.
About it. But do you...
Was just to, excise people from my life when some kind of uncomfortable confrontation came up.
The king cut.
And the problem that I have come to recognize with that kind of lifestyle is that it does not place value on other people. If you're not even worth me listening to in order to preserve our relationship or understand who you are or what you're thinking about.
Look for herself.
I think, first of all, why should I ever assume that anyone else would do that for me if I'm not willing to do that for anybody, right? Because I think if you have a different viewpoint from somebody else, what you're asking them to do is to care enough about you that they will be willing to listen to your viewpoint and consider it instead of just ignoring you or ending the relationship. That didn't work the way I wanted. It's okay. So I think when you practice ignoring people and ending the relationship as a response to conflict,
Curiosity.
I think you gotta stop and you gotta ask yourself, um, why do I expect anybody else to do anything different for me other than ignore me and end the relationship?
Curiosity.
And I would say at first I thought, yeah, that's fine. I don't care, right? That's the I don't care coming back of just like, okay, yeah, ignore me and the relationship, whatever. I don't care. Doesn't matter to me. So, um, when I see this happening in our society as a whole, I think, okay, well, I recognize what this is. Like, I understand this on a deep level because this is how I've been choosing to behave for so long. So then from there, I have to confront it and I have to decide, like, okay, so is it okay for me to behave this way or not?
She stole the book away from the king for a time and delved into its secrets. Then,
Okay, I feel like there's a bit here. I'm not a huge fan of the controls here.
secrets. Then,
This, I don't like this. So I guess that's to try to get back to the point. I think that's the first part is if you're going to say that you care about other people, then you're going to have to be willing to have difficult conversations with them, and you're going to have to be willing to endure the discomfort of it, and you're going to have to be willing to have a level of humility that accepts that you might be wrong. Like, that's a big ask, I understand, but you've got to figure out a way to get there.
she shared it with me.
You got to figure out a way to get to where you can accept that you might be wrong, and to get to a place where did I select paste? I think I did. Okay, I'm a little confused about how this program is working right now. I thought I could just silence this. And it's saying you cannot. Why? Sorry, I'm trying to figure out what's going on. Maybe I clicked on something inadvertently. I do tend to click around. I just really wanted this to be silenced. Just kind of what I've been doing all along. Huh. Yeah, I wish I I wish I knew more than I know, I guess. All right. Here's what I'm going to do. Let's see if maybe the audio file is just too big. I don't think that's what's going on, but again, sidebar here. I don't have any interest in learning this program or learning how to edit audio or being a skilled audio editor. Doesn't interest me in the slightest. Not a skill set I want to have or care about. The reason why I'm doing this is because I made an audiobook and I want to make it available on Audible, and I want to clean it up first. That's it. That's all I'm trying to accomplish. So knowing the ins and outs of this program means absolutely nothing to me. I couldn't care less. I'm just trying to get through cleaning up this audio. So if somebody knew way more about this than I do, and they're watching this going, well, this is the obvious thing that you're doing. Well, all I can say is it's not obvious to me. And I guess this is kind of a really unnecessarily defensive response for sure. I don't see what the problem is. I don't see or understand what the problem is. I really just want to do this. I want to silence out the silences, I guess. Make sure that there's no breathing or lip smacking or whatever going on. And I don't understand why the program won't let me do it. I find that incredibly frustrating. So that was my solution. I'm just going to cut that whole piece of audio out. Makes this track shorter. Maybe that makes it work. Seems to have made it work. Don't know why. Whatever. Let's move on.
Things.
Actually, naming it 16.5 is a bad idea. Because 17 is an actual section of the book. So I'm going to probably rename this one 17.2, and I'll name that one 17.1. That way I know that they're both part of the same section.
Things.
I don't know if it's a matter of like Audacity is not capable of handling large files. I don't know why that would be true. It is free software. So maybe, I'm not sure. I don't really have, being that I'm not actually at this time making any money from what I'm doing, I don't really have the ability to purchase software. And then in addition to that, I don't necessarily know what the best software would be for me. I'm not familiar enough
to read, but
I'm not familiar enough with the different audio editors out there. I'm not even familiar enough to be able to say like what they are. I couldn't even tell you. I know there's like an Adobe one. I know that. Adobe Audition.
possible to read, but there are
But you can't get Adobe software without subscribing, and their subscription fees are ludicrously expensive. I can't afford it.
creation and
So this is where we are. We're trying to make it work with Audacity. I am operating under the presumption that Audacity can do anything Audition can do. I could be totally wrong about that. But anyway, yeah, that was frustrating.
kingdom. Now,
That it wouldn't let me silence it. I hope that doesn't happen again. All right. So I totally messed up my train of thought, and I think like I've spent like a huge amount of time probably
now, to
making like a really simple point. But I guess what I'm trying to get at is that I think that we should care about each other more, not less. And I think if you're going to care about the people around you, you have to have the humility to listen.
To be fair, there...
And that's a two-way street, too, by the way. Like, the person who obviously knows more about it needs to have the humility to be able to listen to the person who knows less about it. Because just simply the fact that you know less about it doesn't invalidate anything you're thinking. I have had a lot of people tell me in life that, oh, you don't know what you're talking about, so shut up.
The ancient kingdom. Wait.
And I think that that is a really harmful response. I understand that if you're an expert talking about something, explaining something, it can be irritating to have to deal with people having thoughts about it. And I think, yeah, there's an appropriate and an inappropriate time to disagree on a viewpoint. But to just completely shut somebody else's thought process down by saying, well, because you don't have as much information as I do, nothing you have to say is valid. I don't think that that's healthy. It's a very situational thing.
But true facts are precious few.
I do think that people have a tendency to try to just shut each other up like that, and I don't think that's good. Part of the process of evaluating a mindset or an ideology, part of the process is thinking it through. And part of the process of thinking it through for a lot of people, maybe not for everybody, but for a lot of people, part of that process looks like expressing ideas and opinions that may be invalid, but if you don't let people express them, then you might be preventing them from processing what you're trying to say and understanding it.
To the issue.
I tend to think of myself as being relatively adept at evaluating opposing viewpoints and considering them and thinking about why I might agree or disagree. But one of the things that really turns me off to a conversation is when I'm told that I don't matter.
Opinion about it.
And I think that kind of undercuts the whole point of what I'm trying to say, which is like, we should think of other people as mattering and mattering enough that we're willing to listen to them, both when they have something to teach us and when we have something to teach them, or even when we don't know which is which in the conversation.
Self holds that the...
I think a lot of people cannot... I think you can understand that probably more times than not, you don't even know if you're the one teaching your friend or if your friend is the one teaching you. Like, it's not necessarily clear which is which. I'm going over time a little bit here, but I want to work my way through the rest of this audio file, which is a long one.
Split because of... Kingdom split because of...
Another, like, it's a really soft breath, but I think it's definitely there. So when is the right time to have a difficult conversation? Because I think this is another piece of the puzzle, is that sometimes it's just not the right time to disagree. I'm thinking of, like, I worked in an office environment for 13 years, and I regularly in that environment practiced keeping my mouth shut. So, you know, I have some trepidation, perhaps some concern about in keeping my eyes shut, in keeping my mouth shut. What just happened? Hang on. I'm at the end? something wonky here. And I guess I would say I feel like that's the right call. Okay. I'm not at the end, but a huge chunk of audio was cut out here. So we'll do this. Okay. Very frequently in the office environment, people would say things that I found, uncouth or offensive, disagreeable.
Kingdom.
In an office environment, you're going to be surrounded by a great many people. And when there's a lot of people, there's going to be a lot of viewpoints and a lot of different ideas. And depending on the personality of the people that you're surrounded by,
truth we know is
some of those people might want to really push their ideologies at you or on you. So a couple comments about that. First of all, if somebody's doing that to you, like, that's not a conversation, right? So if they take a step back and think about what they're doing, they should be able to recognize they're not having a conversation with you. So they're not really going to change your mind.
you grass and you.
So when people do that, I think you could just recognize right off the bat, like, they're doing this for themselves, like for their own benefit. It's more about what they're getting out of it than it is about changing your mind or benefiting you in any way. Like, they just, something about this makes them feel better, about whatever. And so I think in recognizing that, you could choose what your approach is going to be. Like, is your approach going to be, okay, well, I need to shut them down because they might be making somebody feel uncomfortable. They might be actively hurting someone by doing this. And that could be true. Like, there are situations where just running your mouth does cause actual harm to other people.
Ways.
And I think most people are able to recognize that. If you're making yo mama jokes at the funeral of somebody's mother, maybe you might be causing an offense. You might be hurting them in some way. And I think most people can kind of recognize, okay, so there are definitely times when it's not a good idea to do this.
Ages. In fact,
I don't think that's a controversial statement. And I think in the office environment, this is what you run into more often than not, is where somebody, maybe they just don't get listened to anywhere else in their life, right? You might find this with like a middle manager or something who you actually have to sit and listen to what they have to say. And that's like, oh, it's an unhealthy power dynamic. Okay, fair enough.
In fact, it's...
But because, like, their family or their close circle of friends don't care enough to listen to their viewpoints or consider them, they, sort of forcibly output their viewpoints on their coworkers in order to feel better.
A concern.
Or to feel relevant. So yeah, like, you could choose to shut them down, or you could choose to say, okay, well, if this makes this person feel better, I can take it. It's fine. Just give them a chance to say what they need to say, and we'll all move on from there. And that's, oftentimes that's a judgment call. Like, if somebody has become overbearing or obnoxious about it, you might legitimately feel like, okay, somebody needs to let this person know this isn't okay. Like, they got to knock this off. It's not good. And I think a lot of people maybe need that more than anything. Like, they need somebody who cares enough to tell them, look, the reason why nobody wants to be around you is because you make everybody really uncomfortable, because you have to do this. You have to try to feel like you're heard by forcing other people to listen to stuff they don't want to listen to.
Tradition.
and you're not having conversations with people. You're just beating people over the head with whatever your idea is, because you can't find anyone else to let you do that. And that's not great. And that's why you're losing friends. That's why people don't want to be around you. Sometimes you need to give somebody a reality check.
Or set foot in our.
And I think that can be healthy. It can be destructive too. That's a judgment call about whether you need to do it, whether it matters, if it's healthy or not. Sometimes you just do it. It's destructive, but you also know that it needed to be done, even though it's destructive. These things take some wisdom. Like, you have to have some social aptitude to understand what's the right thing to do in the moment.
City.
Okay, this is way too long. Let's go ahead and just get rid of some of that. I can worry about the timing of it later, but at least I'm going to reduce. Whoa. Didn't want to do that. At least I want to reduce it down a bit, I think. So it'll be easier. I think what I'm going to end up doing is probably exporting this to like a WAV file, so that it isn't, like sectioned into these different pieces, but it's all one piece of audio. I think that will help, maybe not the software, but it'll help my brain do a better job with it. So sometimes, yeah, you would obviously choose to be more confrontational with somebody for their benefit. But I think that right there, like, that's the question. Is it for their benefit, or is it for your benefit? Or is it for the benefit of somebody else who really needs your help? Like, what is it? Is it just because you're passively a little annoyed? Maybe you shouldn't do it.
Would not. They.
I've known a lot of people, and I suspect sometimes that I am the person who is passively annoying the people around. Just sort of constantly bothering people with social ineptitude.
Power and claimed king of power and claimed.
I do hear a breath there. I think I think for everybody, sometimes that's the case. But for some people, more often than not, that's the case. And you really can drive people away by being that person. I think that's 100% true. I remember in college, I didn't have a lot of social ability when I went to college. I hadn't spent a lot of time around other people. I was homeschooled. I think that will just paint a clearer picture. I think my parents actually did a pretty good job trying to make sure that I was socialized and familiar with others, but most of what I did was speaking to other adults. So when it came to just hanging around with people my age and, just guys being guys kind of thing, there were some gaps.
Kingdoms
There's some gaps in my behavior. And I remember one time, like, I don't know what was in my head. I thought that, like, I was really good at making growling noises. And there was this guy, I didn't like what he was doing, and for some reason I thought making growling noises was cool.
It's all in an.
And I couldn't possibly explain why I would have thought that, but I'm very grateful that in that moment I had a friend standing next to me who looked at me and said, "Dude, what are you doing?
Of peace.
Knock it off. Thank you. You know who you are. Thank you." Like, of course, knock it off. Like, that was a ridiculous thing to do. There was no reason to be behaving that way, and it was very cringy and stupid. And, you know, I shouldn't have been doing it. I didn't know I shouldn't have been doing it, which is sad. But thank you for letting me know because I needed to know that. Um, and I'm grateful that you, in no uncertain terms, told me, dude, stop that. That's weird, and you shouldn't be doing it. You were right. It was weird, and I shouldn't have been doing it.
The Senzakij did not.
So that's maybe an extreme example, but I think, this kind of stuff just happens. Like, people are trying to joke around, they're trying to have fun. I think in that mode, and particularly when you're around friends, you tend to be willing to take risks with your behavior.
Royalty,
and sometimes the risks pay off, where it's really funny. People enjoy it. That can be great. And sometimes you're just a dork doing a dorky thing. And it's great that you have a friend standing right next to you going, that was really dorky. Don't do that again.
And they did not agree.
So I think, it's kind of the same thing when people are constantly bringing up disagreeable topics and doing it in social situations where they shouldn't be doing it. It's not appropriate. It's not conducive to what the group is trying to accomplish. Sometimes you need to be that friend that says, hey, knock it off. That's not okay. And sometimes I think you need to be the friend who just says, all right, well, get it off your chest. Say what you're going to say so that we can move on. And that's kind of up to you. But that is not having a difficult telling somebody that they're behaving in a weird way can be difficult to do. They're not going to enjoy hearing that. That can be a confrontational moment. And for those of us who really hate confrontation, why do I really hate confrontation? I really hate confrontation because in the overwhelming majority of confrontations that I've had, I've been the one who looks terrible and ends up embarrassed. So I like to avoid, I don't want to get into a confrontation because there is a higher than average chance that I'm going to look stupid at the end of it.
Best.
Now, is just avoid confrontation the best approach? Probably not. I think the more you have confrontation, the better you get at doing it, and the more you're able to do it gracefully. I guess there's a level of fear that plays into it. Like, nobody wants to look like an idiot, and I'm very adept at looking like an idiot. But anyway, when somebody is just running their mouth in an inappropriate context, that's not having a difficult conversation. So I think a different set of rules applies. You're basically just deciding whether or not you need to let them know how foolish they look. And that's that. So I do think that there's a lot of contexts like that where it's just not time to have a difficult conversation. But when, you're sitting around the table with somebody you trust and you share a very different viewpoint with them and they're trying to express why they think differently than you. This is the kind of context where I'm saying, having the fear of looking stupid or an unwillingness to spend the time to work through ideas that you're not comfortable with really is an expression of not caring about that person in a lot of ways.
Differences.
Now, so what happened between me and my family member after I was a huge jerk to them and told them to get out of my house? Well, they left. They were very kind and respectful about the incident. They basically did everything the right way, which left me in a situation where
to push for new borderlines.
I just had to straight up apologize. Um, so my advice when you're apologizing would be like this: be as complete as possible. You know, spend some time thinking about, like, even the things you might not have realized that you did wrong.
Catastrophic war.
So for me, I mulled it over for a couple days. I really thought through the situation, and I came up with three main points of like what I did wrong. And so I sent them a text message, and I explained the three things that I thought that I did wrong.
The ancient book.
And I apologized for each of those three things in order. And then at the end, I acknowledged, you know more about this than I do, and you have spent more time thinking about it recently than I have, and I should have given you the opportunity to explain yourself to me. It was wrong of me not to. And I think, you know, maybe I'm wrong, but I think that's the way you go about apologizing. Like, you spend some time and you think about the offenses that you know that you caused, and spend some time thinking about the offenses that you might have caused that you maybe weren't on your mind in the moment.
More light on what happened at Calugrass.
And so, you know, after I did that, then he came back to me, you know, with I think one or two of the points that I made, and said, like, that wasn't it for me. I wasn't bothered by that. I think better to have been circumspect and thought about what you might have done, and, you know, express to that, you know, if this was something that I did, I feel bad about it, because I definitely didn't want that. Better to have done that than, you know, the opposite, which would be for him to come back and say, hey, you also did this and you didn't talk about it at all.
For these three groups to separate.
All right, this is a long one. This is a really long audio file. I didn't know I had any this long. I mean, it's still under 3 minutes. It's not terrible. I am getting a bit hungry, though. I'm supposed to be making lunch right now. But I'm behind in my morning project, and I'm behind in this project, and I know I wanted to talk about difficult conversations, but this is a good thing to talk about. Things can back up on you like this, and it can start to get out of hand.
Eating in Calugrass.
This is why I teach my kids to stay on top of their responsibilities, right? Because, like, you can very quickly get in a situation where you just don't have enough time to do all the things that you want to, or perhaps need to do. And that happens by either things taking longer than you thought, or you just procrastinating longer than you should. The latter, for me, a lot more often. And I, you know, in large part was trying to make an excuse for procrastinating too much by talking about the different hurdles that you have to get over in order to put something out there for the world to have an opinion about.
Or killed overnight.
And I think, you know, that's a part of it. Like, it feels dangerous. That makes it difficult. And then there's just a ton of procrastination that happens, which is not, ultimately, at the end of the day, it's not really the world's fault that you're procrastinating. It's your fault, because you chose to handle the conflict by procrastinating, and that's what I've done. To the detriment of the people around me, right? Like, I've prioritized working on this project over all of the other things that I also need to do that also impact the people around me. And that can be acceptable to do if it's an important project, or, you know, which I think this is.
Aimed at were aimed at saving lives.
But when you introduce a bunch of procrastination into it because you're afraid of the outcome, which I think for me that kind of sums up what's going on. Like, I'm afraid of what the outcome is going to look like. I'm afraid of people not being aware of what I've made, people not liking it or not being interested in it.
Kingdom had already been torn out.
I'm afraid to find that out. So if you're afraid to fail, what you can do instead is you can procrastinate, because then you never get to the point where you actually fail. You're still on the journey. But that's a really bad place to be. And this is part of the reason why, is because responsibilities start piling up on you, and it starts to get overwhelming, and it starts to get out of hand. Another thing that happens, like if you're making content that you're trying to share with people,
That's not real.
People only have, I think, a certain amount of patience. So if you're telling people, look, I've made a trilogy of books, or I've planned a trilogy of books, and maybe people are into it. They're like, I'm excited for your trilogy of books. This sounds great. There is no magic place where it all just becomes comfortable for you as the person creating it. And if you spend all of your time procrastinating and not doing it, what you're doing is you're spending your audience's patience, because your audience only has a certain amount of patience. They only have a certain amount of ability to care about what it is that you're doing.
Name of the ancient.
And so when you're just not doing it,
Kingdom. Have you?
For whatever personal reason, I don't think people are so calloused that they're unwilling to allow you to have personal issues. That's not it. It's just you're gonna burn through their patience. They're gonna get to a place where they just don't care anymore. They're not interested. And how long it takes to get there really depends on how much what you've created resonates with them. I can think about something like Baldur's Gate 3, video game, right? The first Baldur's Gate that I ever played. Now, as far as the audience of people who had played the others, did they care about Baldur's Gate 3? Like, were they waiting on the edge of their seat for Baldur's Gate 3? Probably not. Like, it'd been, 20 years? And I definitely, I knew some people who, for Baldur's Gate 2, they were like, oh, best game ever. Best game ever. How could you have not played it? It's like, it's the best thing.
Oh, formal and nondescript.
And maybe they're right. Like, I don't know. I've never played it. So if you this is a weird example, I guess, but if you were just a solo person, you were the only person who ever worked on that project, and you had promised people Baldur's Gate 3, 20 years ago, but you only just now in 2023 delivered on that promise. I think you've spent your audience's concern. They're not maybe they're interested. They'll definitely check it out once you finally do it.
Apparently.
But after 20 years, they just don't really care. The relevance has faded. I think of somebody like George R.R. Martin, who's another author. That's a weird way to say it. He's not just another author. He's an incredibly successful author with a very loyal fan base who is very interested in his
days.
Next book, I think final book, I'm not sure, in his series that he has created. His fans are extremely interested. And it's been some time. It's been quite a lot of time. Now, it hasn't been quite a lot of time since he's produced anything.
Days. They had
But it's been quite a lot of time since he released the last book.
the
So even in that context, like, he is spending his fans' patience, right? Like, by taking extra time. This is the danger of procrastination. Now, fortunately, what he's done has really resonated with his audience to the extent that they're still holding on.
bosses.
They still care. They still care a lot. That's great. Like, that's a beautiful place to be. It's a variable thing, and it does really depend on how much your work resonates with your fan base. I don't have a fan base. Well, that's not true. I have like 3 fans, and thank you immensely to all 3 fans. So for me to have told my 3 fans, "Hey, look, I've released the first part, and I'm working on the second part, and there's 4 parts," like, they have a certain amount of investment.
For many years.
But if I spend, as I have, 4 months procrastinating,
Birthright. And
because I'm struggling personally with staying motivated and taking the next step forward, you know, they do absolutely have a certain level of patience with that.
birthright. And birthright. And seem to drift aimlessly.
But at a certain point, even those 3 diehard loyal people are going to say, "Okay, well, I guess he wasn't serious. I don't think he's really working on it." Or they might say something like, "I think that I care about this more than you do." Which is a bad, I mean, that sounds like a good thing. It's a bad thing.
Shaw was the
you, as the creator of the content, I think should definitely care more about the content than any of your fans, because I think that's gonna show if you're not doing that. So what are the things that I need to get done? Well, I need to get these audio files edited, and that's what I'm working on.
To you.
This was something that I had promised my wife was going to be done weeks ago, and it's not done. So that's not good. That's that creates trust issues. It's not healthy. I don't like that. I'm gonna change this a little bit. And it's something that, the things that I've told the people who do care about what I'm doing, who do already care about what I'm doing, I've alluded to them that I'm going to get this done quickly. And honestly, when I alluded that to them, I was thinking, yeah, I am going to get this done quickly. I'm going to be done. My original goal was to be done by the end of February. And I think that was possible, but I didn't do it. I allowed myself to get sucked under a little bit. And there's a cost to that. It has placed myself and my family in an awkward position, and it's my fault.
As Tiala.
So I think, like, the biggest thing I am trying to accomplish here is to leave something that my kids can go back and look at, even whether I'm alive or not. Like, I presented it as like, well, if I were to, unexpectedly die, I would want something for them to see, because that was the compelling thing that I saw from my father-in-law. But even if not that, like, I think even if I'm still alive and still doing things. I think it's valuable for my kids to have some kind of reference point to meet me
selfishness and rogue gods.
as a person. I guess I'm of the opinion that it only benefits your children to understand who you are as a person, because your children are very much defined by who you are as a person, and the more that they can understand that, the better off they will be.
Trenus and Argolis, the twin gods of war.
I think we all kind of wrestle with that too. Like it's difficult to understand how impactful your parents are on who you are as a person, and then when you start to understand it,
Freed him. Because
sometimes your reaction to that can look a lot like just blaming them. I think that's been true for me. Like, as I've understood more and more some of the pressures and motivations that my parents had to deal with,
King,
I have been able to connect some of the dots between, what they went through and some of my own behaviors. And in connecting those dots and like calling them up and talking about it, I think there is a certain sense of like, oh, so you're blaming us for this problem.
Honor her. He
Because that's what it sounds like. I guess for me, I don't really feel like my parents are to blame. I just get excited when I see a correlation.
To construct an enormous.
I don't really feel any need to hold my parents accountable for something that they went through, 20 years ago.
To construct an enormous temple where.
I don't know why anybody's holding anybody accountable for stuff. I think for some things, for sure, like there's no limitation for how long your responsibility lasts.
Worshipped y'all.
And those are kind of like the big bad things. I think we all recognize what I'm not gonna list them. I'm not gonna name them. It doesn't matter. I think we all understand that there are some things that the responsibility doesn't fade. But as far as like the decisions
was erected.
that my parents made, hang on a second. That sort of impacted, who I am right now and some of the tendencies that I've displayed. I've gotten excited to discover those correlations and to sort of like report back, oh, like I can see that I do this, and I think that's something that, I kind of got from you. That can be helpful to do, but in my heart, like I think I've always clung to the idea that like I'm my own person and I am happy to be responsible for who I am. I enjoy the usefulness of saying, hey, this...
Since Tial isn't O's, since Tial isn't really a deity, and...
This is where it comes from, and I now I understand it more, and I feel less alone in the experience of it. I don't really like the decisions that I've made. They're my decisions, and the things that I've done wrong, I've done wrong. My parents didn't do them wrong. I did.
Her.
So, while I think sometimes for them, it feels like I'm coming to them and saying, okay, well, this is your fault. For me, that's not true at all. It's not their fault. It's just like, oh, I see you did this too. And there's a large amount of comfort that comes from that. Not everybody feels the same way about their parents, but for me, I love my parents. I think that they're great. I think they're great people. I think it is useful to recognize some of the things, some of the tendencies that they have, some of the things that they do that I disagree with,
named his daughter.
and even to recognize like the reasons why I think that they do that, and the things that have happened to them, and how they have impacted their decision making. I think that's all very helpful to recognize. But yeah, I don't hold my parents to account for my poor decisions.
He, like,
That's on me. This file is crazy. Uh, I don't know exactly what happened while I was recording this. I think I probably recorded a little bit and then maybe I paused it. Maybe that's what's going on here. Like these are pauses that are happening. Um, I don't know. Like I don't know that I'm even going to be able to finish this. It's feeling like a bit much, which is probably kind of a ridiculous thing to say. I'm not on the last piece, am I? Is this the last piece? Probably wasting more time trying to figure out if it's the last piece than I, could have just been done. I am feeling the need to be done though. So, all right. I think this is the last piece. I think I'm going to wrap this up before I make lunch, but I think I'm done here. I've kind of rambled for a bit now, got off topic, but I think this was good. This was a good work day.